The sea off the coast of Seaview was a deceptive beast, beautiful one moment, brutal the next. On a blustery Tuesday in March, it claimed another victim, or so everyone thought. Asher Corvus, a man known more for his quiet, meticulous life as a civil servant than for any grand adventure, had seemingly vanished. The last anyone saw of him was the bright orange of his kayak, a small, vibrant speck on the churning gray waves before it disappeared behind a curtain of rain. The wreckage of the kayak, a mangled mess of fiberglass and rope, washed ashore 2 days later, confirming the town's darkest fears. His wife, Lenore Corvus, stood on the desolate cliffs, a solitary figure against the tumultuous sky, watching the Coast Guard ships futilely scour the water. Her face, a mask of profound grief, became a fixture on the local news. The town of Seaview rallied around her, pitying the widowed mother of 2 grown sons, Malachi and Jasper. Lenore appeared utterly broken by the tragedy, her every public appearance a masterclass in sorrow. She sobbed for the cameras, her voice trembling as she recounted the last time she saw her husband. The hefty insurance payout, a sum that would finally erase their mounting debts and solve all their financial troubles, was the only silver lining in this devastating cloud. But not everyone was convinced. Detective Miles Corbin, a man who saw patterns in chaos and lies in grief, felt a nagging unease. The search efforts yielded no debris, no sign of Asher's body. The kayak wreckage was found suspiciously quickly, almost as if it had been placed there. The disappearance was too clean, too perfect. Corbin began his quiet investigation with the seemingly trivial, like the family's finances. He discovered that the Corvuses were on the verge of bankruptcy, facing foreclosure on their home. This provided a powerful motive. He noticed Lenore's grief, while outwardly convincing, seemed to lack a genuine core. It felt performative, a well-rehearsed act. During her second interview, he deliberately asked a question he'd already asked about the brand of waterproof watch Asher had been wearing. She answered with a different, confident answer, but her eyes flickered to the left, a classic sign of fabrication. Corbin's trail led him to a small, isolated cabin a few miles inland, a place Asher had rented under a false name months before his disappearance. The cabin was nearly empty, but on the floor, tucked under a loose floorboard, Corbin found a receipt for a new satellite phone. This was the first true crack in the carefully constructed facade. He couldn't shake the feeling that Asher Corvus wasn't dead, but hiding. The question was why, and more importantly, with whose help? Meanwhile, life in Seaview began to return to a fragile new normal. Lenore cashed the insurance check, paid off their debts, and started a life of quiet luxury. But the sons were struggling. Malachi, the eldest, a struggling artist, felt a growing resentment toward his seemingly carefree mother. Jasper, the younger, a quiet and observant accountant, was more suspicious. He noticed that whenever he called his mother to check in, she would step away from the phone, her voice dropping to a whisper. It was a habit she'd never had before. One rainy evening, while fixing a leaky faucet in the family home, Jasper stumbled upon a hidden compartment in the wall behind the sink. Inside, he found a passport. The picture was unmistakably his father, Asher Corvus, but the name on the document was entirely different. The passport was new, and a quick check of the dates revealed it had been issued months after Asher had supposedly died at sea. The truth hit Jasper like a tidal wave. His father wasn't dead. The man his family had mourned was alive. Jasper felt a cold dread as he realized his father had faked his own death. But why? He began to re-examine everything he knew, every detail of the last few months, and a more sinister pattern began to emerge. The final twist came not from the sea, but from a quiet suburban street. The private investigator hired by the insurance company to confirm the death had been watching Lenore. He saw her get into a car and drive not to the cemetery, but to a seemingly random, unassuming house. He watched, hidden in his vehicle, as Lenore met a man who opened the door. It was Asher. But before the investigator could react, Lenore wasn't greeting him with relief or joy. Her face was contorted in anger, and her hushed words, "Our plan" and "You ruined everything," echoed in the still night air. The investigator realized Asher was not the mastermind. He was a desperate, panicked participant. He had planned to hide out for a few years and then re-emerge to start a new life, but Lenore had found him and was furious he wasn't sticking to their original, more sinister plan. The true criminal genius was Lenore, a woman who had orchestrated the entire disappearance to solve her family's debts and start a new life. The grieving widow was nothing more than a carefully crafted lie, and the plot twist was not a man returning from the dead, but the woman who had faked his death all along. Asher was now a hostage to his own lies and his wife's ruthless ambition. The idyllic suburban life of the Aris family was a perfect picture, right up until the frame shattered. Kaylin and Lyra Aris, along with their two young children, 8-year-old Finian and 12-year-old Willow, were found brutally murdered in their home. The scene was one of unimaginable horror, a quiet house transformed into a grisly tableau of unspeakable violence. The community of Springdale reeled in shock, unable to comprehend such a monstrous act. It was the kind of crime that happened in big cities, not in their quiet, tree-lined streets where everyone knew everyone else. The media descended, broadcasting the smiling, tragic faces of the Aris family to a horrified nation, turning their private tragedy into a public spectacle. Detective Sergeant Annalise Reed, a veteran investigator with a reputation for a sharp mind and an even sharper intuition, was put on the case. The early evidence was baffling. There were no signs of forced entry, no valuable items stolen from the house, and no clear motive. The scene suggested a deeply personal attack, not a robbery gone wrong. Annalise's initial focus was on the estranged relationships within the extended family, but everyone had solid alibis, corroborated by friends and colleagues. The case was turning cold, a heavy weight on her conscience. The lack of a motive was the most frustrating part. Who would want to kill a family, including two small children, for no apparent reason? The biggest mystery was the eldest daughter, Serafina, a 16-year-old who had survived the attack but claimed she had been asleep in her bedroom when the murders occurred. She said she had been wearing headphones, listening to music, and was only awoken by the sound of sirens. Her story was full of holes, inconsistencies that a grieving child might make, but something felt deeply off to Annalise. Serafina was strangely calm for someone who had just lost her entire family in such a horrific way. She spoke of her parents and siblings with a detached indifference that chilled Annalise to the bone. She cried for the cameras, but the tears seemed to dry the moment the lens was off her. Annalise's intuition, honed over 2 decades of seeing the worst of humanity, told her the killer was no stranger. The violence was too intimate, too specific. It was a family affair, a truth that no one wanted to believe. Annalise began to focus on the small, almost insignificant details. The placement of a single chair, the way a window was half open, the absence of a particular family photograph. To an untrained eye, they were nothing. To Annalise, they were breadcrumbs, a trail left behind by a mind as calculating and cold as a serpent. She started with the family's history, not just the recent past, but the deep, buried secrets. She found a trail of whispers and hushed conversations about Kaylin Aris, the patriarch, and his controlling nature. He had alienated his siblings, cut off his parents, and was rumored to have an iron grip on his wife and children. Serafina, the surviving daughter, was his project, his trophy. He had pushed her relentlessly, demanding perfection in her grades, her extracurriculars, and her life. Annalise's suspicion about Serafina's strange composure only deepened. She saw not grief, but a quiet, simmering rage. The major plot twist came when Annalise started to look at Serafina's boyfriend, a troubled young man named Kian. Kian had a history of petty crime and an explosive temper, and he openly resented the Arises, who had forbidden Serafina from seeing him. He admitted to being with Serafina the night of the murders, but only to drop her off after their date. He too had a solid alibi. But Annalise's team found something disturbing in Serafina's phone records, a series of encrypted messages between her and Kian, and a third, unknown party. The conversations hinted at a plan, a desperate measure to get out. The messages were chillingly specific, discussing the plan and getting rid of the whole family. Annalise painstakingly tracked down the third party, an older, seemingly normal man named Peregrine, who had no connection to the Aris family. He had been messaging Serafina and Kian for a year, and the messages were a disturbing mix of encouragement and dark fantasies. Peregrine was not a friend or a relative. He was an online acquaintance Serafina had been messaging for a year, who had encouraged her dangerous fantasies about her family. The truth was far more twisted than a simple family dispute. Serafina, feeling suffocated by her parents' strict rules and desperate to be with Kian, had devised a plan to have her family killed, believing it was the only way to be truly free. She hadn't been asleep. She had been a participant. The final, horrifying revelation came when Annalise's team analyzed the forensic evidence from the crime scene. They found a footprint from a rare, expensive brand of sneakers, a brand that Kian, a boy from a working-class family, would never be able to afford. The footprint matched one found in a photo on Peregrine's social media. The horrifying truth was that Serafina had orchestrated the murders, but it was Peregrine, the seemingly normal man who lived a double life as a sadistic killer, who had carried them out. The man she had been talking to online, the man she trusted with her darkest secrets, was a ghost in the machine, a malevolent presence who had used the girl's desperation to execute a crime of pure, unadulterated evil. The killer wasn't the obvious suspect. He was the ghost in the machine, a malevolent presence who had used the girl's desperation to execute a crime of pure, unadulterated evil. The final, damning piece of evidence was a single piece of paper left behind, a note from Peregrine to Serafina, a chilling reminder that their secret was now his to keep. The drive down Highway 1 to Big Sur was supposed to be a romantic adventure for newlyweds Caleb and Elara Thorne. The open road, the breathtaking coastal views, the promise of a quiet getaway. It was a perfect plan until a broken-down car on a desolate stretch of road shattered their dream. A man stood beside a rusty vehicle, a picture of distress. He was a disheveled figure, his face streaked with grime, looking like he'd been stranded for hours. Caleb, a good Samaritan at heart, slowed down, pulling his own car to a stop a few yards ahead. It was a decision that would plunge them into a nightmare. The man, who introduced himself as Corbin, was charming and polite in a way that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. He claimed his car had run out of gas and asked if they could give him a ride to the next town. He flashed a disarming smile, and despite a flicker of unease, Caleb and Elara agreed. As they drove, the atmosphere in the car shifted. Corbin's pleasantries gave way to tense silence. He would stare at them in the rearview mirror, his eyes dark and unreadable. They were miles from the nearest town when Corbin pulled out a gun, the cold glint of metal a horrifying counterpoint to the scenic beauty outside the window. The kind, stranded stranger was a kidnapper. Corbin forced them to drive to a remote, abandoned cabin deep in the woods. The days that followed were a blur of terror. He demanded a ransom, forcing Ilara to call her wealthy parents. Caleb and Ilara, bound and gagged, were at his mercy. Corbin was an expert at psychological warfare, taunting them with their helplessness, playing mind games to break their spirits. He would leave for hours at a time, seemingly to make the final arrangements for the money transfer. During one of these absences, Caleb, using a broken piece of glass from a shattered window, managed to cut his ropes and free Ilara. They escaped into the dense forest, running for their lives, their hearts pounding in their ears. But the real twist wasn't in their escape. It was in the details of the kidnapping itself. A team of FBI agents, led by a seasoned negotiator named Agent Reese, had been working with Ilara's parents from the moment the ransom call was made. Reese found the details of the kidnapping puzzling. Corbin never seemed to be in a rush. He was unusually patient, and some of the ransom demands felt less about money and more about keeping the couple isolated. Reese was an expert at reading between the lines, and something about the case felt off. The lack of desperation in the kidnapper's voice, the almost theatrical nature of his threats, it all seemed like a performance. The first major clue came when they analyzed Ilara's conversations with her parents. She had used a series of subtle, coded phrases that a young woman who had just survived a year-long abusive relationship with a very controlling partner might use to signal danger, but not this kind of danger. It was a language only someone who had been through what Ilara had could understand. Agent Reese's team dug into Ilara's past and found her ex-boyfriend, a manipulative, violent man named Jonas, who had a history of faking emergencies to get her attention. But Jonas had a solid alibi. He was in prison, a fact that seemed to lead to a dead end. The final devastating plot twist came from an unexpected source, the ransom note itself. A forensic analysis revealed that the note, which had been delivered to Ilara's parents, was written in a distinctive archaic script that was nearly identical to Ilara's own handwriting. The agents dug deeper into her phone records and found an old file on her cloud storage, a meticulously detailed plan for a fake kidnapping, complete with coded phrases and escape routes. The plan was dated 2 months before the wedding. It was clear that the kidnapping wasn't an act of terror by a stranger. It was an act of desperation by a woman trapped in a marriage she no longer wanted, a woman who needed a way out without hurting her family. The horrifying truth revealed to Agent Reese was that there was no Corbin. He was a man Ilara and Caleb had paid to play the role of the kidnapper, an actor they had found on the internet. But the actor wasn't supposed to have been armed or aggressive. He was supposed to have simply helped them with the scheme. But the actor wasn't just an actor. He was a man with a dark past, a man who had seen an opportunity and taken it. The plot twist wasn't a man being a kidnapper, but a woman orchestrating the entire event herself, only to find that her desperate plan was now in the hands of a truly dangerous stranger who was using her own scheme against her. Please like and subscribe.